Great to be here. Awesome conference. Really enjoyed so many of the talks so far. So fantastic to kind of be part of this event. So I'm going to be talking about the impact of AI, why I have no idea what it will be, and neither do you. I'll quickly introduce myself. Dave Rogers. I'm a partner at Public Digital. Tell you a bit about Public Digital in a second. I've got a background. I used to be a software developer. Got involved a lot in kind of data systems at places like the kind of Guardian and the BBC. Got very interested in government work just about at a time when government digital service was becoming a thing. And then I've kind of found my way into advising and consulting with organizations somewhere in that kind of world of digital leadership, technology, and so on. This is the awesome team that I work with. Public Digital is a kind of small-ish, we're growing quite fast, consultancy. We're globally based. We do lots of really interesting work. If I was to try and describe what we do, we support organizations through radical transformation. So we're the kind of consultancy that goes after, I guess, like really interesting transformation challenges in organizations. We work with a really interesting and varied set of clients, from the Premier League of Moderna through to the Home Office and the Canadian Digital Service. So lots of really interesting work. But I'm here to talk about AI. So I guess in the spirit of the conference, I'm going to quickly introduce what I mean by AI when I'm using it in this talk. I think of AI as an umbrella. It's an expansive umbrella. There's lots of things you can put under it in terms of how you might understand it. Here's maybe some of the typical things you might have heard in many of the other speakers today. These are things that are considered part of the AI world. I'm not going to be talking about any of these specifically, so that's about as jargony as my talk's going to get. Really, and this is my perception of how I kind of read about AI, I guess maybe in kind of more kind of mainstream kind of media sources, is that it's starting to kind of mix in data, software, and I think simply the appearance of a machine doing something clever. And I think it's worth kind of recognizing quite how broad that umbrella is in terms of its popular understanding. Even if that's maybe a very inexact understanding from a kind of academic or technical point of view. For the purposes of my talk, it's the whole umbrella. I'm talking about the whole umbrella. So I'm not going to be talking about big AI, so I'm not going to be talking about a lot of the big tech companies and the AI systems that they build and provide. I'm not going to be talking about the tools and the ecosystem that kind of sits on top of that. There's lots of interesting kind of intermediate platform companies, tool companies, interface providers. I'm talking about where AI kind of starts to meet the real world, and people are trying to solve problems using AI as one tool amongst many other tools. This is the kind of world I come from. I've worked for organizations like the BBC and the Ministry of Justice, where we're trying to solve kind of real world problems using technology. And that's the kind of domain I'm going to talk to you about. Slightly more specifically, I'm going to talk to you about organizations. Public Digital tends to work with larger organizations. We often use the word institution because we work with a lot of organizations that have been around a long time. Obviously that could be governments, but it's also kind of banks, major retailers, and so on. Institutions start to kind of get layers and complexity inside them, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk to you about today. This is a little simplified model of an organization I'm going to kind of refer back to in the talk. So at the bottom, maybe at the heart of the organization, you've got a healthy culture. This is an idealized organization, by the way. You've got a healthy culture. You've got a dynamic operating model that responds to a changing environment. You're really good at digital in the broadest sense. You're great at data. You're great at user-centered design. You're great at delivering software and commodity technology. And then on top of that, the cherry on the top of the cake, you're really good at AI. So that's the ideal organization. Okay, I don't know. This is a phrase that I don't think I hear enough in this industry, if AI is an industry. around people, I guess, coming at this with a bit of kind of humility about particularly like the impact of AI. Specifically, I don't know what the impact of AI will be on everyday useful things like helping us travel, helping us manage our money, helping us access healthcare. I don't think anyone knows. And I'm going to kind of try and kind of demonstrate that to you. Now, part of why I don't know is through this organisational lens. Most organisations are like this. There are fracture lines through that perfect model that I described to you. There are maybe problems with the culture. There are problems in the operating model. There are shortcomings in how organisations go about digital and AI. And it's through that kind of lens that, like, when we apply AI, we are typically doing it in the context of imperfect organisations. So what do I know? So trying to make AI do useful things for people is an unpredictable activity. And I'm going to kind of unpack that a little bit for you now with a bit of a story. So 15 years ago, I worked in this building. This is King's Place. It's up near King's Cross in London. It's the HQ, still is, of what was the Guardian newspaper, and now feels more like the Guardian website. At the time, 15 years ago, print media was far more important than it is today. And it was a point at which the Guardian website was starting to really go global as a platform for news. And the story relates to football. I'm not going to talk too much about the technicalities of football either, but it's a kind of relevant subject matter to the story. So it was a Saturday. Something strange was happening in the Premier League. This is a time-sequenced set of scores that people would have seen on the Guardian website. So they were there on the football pages, looking at the live results as they came in. It was 1-0 to City. It was 1-1 with Arsenal. It was then 1-0 to City again. And the scores went on so on like this in a slightly chaotic fashion where they were not following the traditional method of scoring in football, where the scores only go up. So this is just not how football works. So me and the team, I was a software developer on the team at the time. Our goal was pretty clear: fix the football results. They need to only go up. And we came up with an estimate. We thought it was going to take 30 minutes. It was a great team at the time. It was a really nice culture that I worked in. We were really confident. We knew the model, so we knew how the website worked. We knew where the scores came from. We knew the complicated technical formats in terms of how the results were expressed. We knew how the data was being processed. There was so much that we knew. And with all that knowledge, we perceived this to be a problem that could be fixed in 30 minutes. We knew, for example, that we could turn around production changes in around 10 minutes, which was quite fast for 15 years ago. But we knew we could get that turnaround quite quickly, so we knew we maybe had like a bit of time to think about the problem, go and dig into some of the logs, understand, try and fix the bug. So we genuinely thought it was going to take 30 minutes. It took 3 days. And this story is kind of, I don't know why, it's really stuck with me as just like quite a powerful example of how terrible we are at estimation, and therefore how terrible we are at predicting the future, understanding what it takes with what actually was quite a simple system. We're talking about football results on a fairly static website here. We're not talking about a complicated social domain. We're not talking about really interesting interactions with an institution. It was actually a pretty well-honed team and quite a simple problem. But nonetheless, our estimate was wildly out. I know I would make very similar estimation mistakes today. Now, this is an explanation of what actually happened. Please don't read this. If you are a technical person and you're interested and the slides go out, this is my vague, wishy-washy explanation of what I think happened 15 years ago. There's lots of interesting reasons why it took 3 days, but that's not what this talk is about. Talk is about the disparity between the 30-minute estimate and the 3 days. What's the moral of this story? So I've just kind of expressed that. Like even within that kind of structured domain, that medium of data and software is really unpredictable. And I don't think we really kind of talk to ourselves much about how intrinsically unpredictable it is. And we've got this kind of problem I'm going to start talking about called false certainty, where we've started to kind of think too much about the sense that we can predict this world. Add in like the opacity and the mysteries of modern AI, and that predictability goes down. I have an application that helps me to ensure that I don't get neck problems, which is going to just pop up again unless I turn it off. Does everyone else get problems with... oh, that's Kanji.
We all roll our shoulders. Everybody roll your shoulders.
Everyone do it. Everyone stand up and sit down again.
Forwards.
Right, quit. We're back. Oh, there you go. Right. So, yeah, you add in the kind of the opacity and mysteries of AI, and I think this predictability of trying to do something with these technologies is becoming even more unpredictable. So after 15 years, I've got this kind of fairly kind of unshakable belief that delivering with digital technology is unpredictable, particularly in the environment where human beings are involved. And almost every aspect and domain I've worked in recently, there's been quite a few human beings involved. I want to put a bit of a disclaimer on this. So I'm not a kind of agile idealist. I do think that if you're trying to get stuff done in organizations, you need plans, you need roadmaps, you need strategies, you need visions, you need deadlines. I worked on the London Olympics at the BBC, delivering data systems. That was the most immovable deadline I've ever worked to, and it was brilliant fun, and it was very agile. The thing you have to do is you have to acknowledge the unpredictability of the things that you're trying to do, even if you're trying to hit a deadline. So false certainty. False certainty is creating the sense that something is more likely to happen than it actually is. So if I was to say, in 2030, all cars will be electric, I might be thought of as a bold futurologist, but most people would go, that sounds actually, I've pieced together in my head what that means. That seems extremely unlikely that all the cars in the world will be electric by 2030. The problem is we've kind of normalized this way of using language, and I think I see it everywhere. Here's an example. Now, with this example, one thing I wanted to say is I'm going to be singling out a couple of organizations in terms of what they've written here. The problem is systemic. Everyone's doing this. So, if you work for these institutions, sorry that I picked on you, but this type of expression of false certainty is everywhere. So, sorry, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change said, with the AI technologies and the digital infrastructure we have today, we estimate that up to 40 billion will be saved each year with the AI technology as it exists now. This probably feels really normal to read. You probably read it casually in like the media, in consultancy papers all the time. The fact is, it's not true. And it can't be proven to be true. It's actually just a bold reckon, really, at best. It's a kind of, it's a ready reckoner from some people that have maybe thought about the problem and have got an opinion about it. The problem is that these opinions start to trickle into fact. Fascinating effect. This is the Telegraph. They said that Microsoft are pledging to end civil service drudgery with admin bots. That's also not going to happen. It is also not true. It's also false certainty. But fascinatingly, it cites the Tony Blair paper as fundamental evidence as to why it's true. So we're actually building these ideas upon each other, and we're creating a kind of a fabrication of what we think the future is going to be. Going maybe deeper inside your organizations, if any of you work in large institutions, you might be familiar with wording like this. These are now slightly toy examples. Next year's budget will be reduced by 20% due to affordability challenges. This will be achieved through efficiency driven by the greater adoption of automation and advanced AI. Again, you'll see in the expression of the language, probably something you've read many times before if you work with these kind of documents. The fact is, it's not true. It is simply wishful thinking. That automation and advanced AI are complex technologies. The organization almost certainly works within some kind of complex domain involving people and change. Who knows if you'll hit the 20% reduction? But it's kind of stated in pseudo-fact and ends up in the kind of tools we use as kind of corporates and institutions. Here's another one. I work a lot in the public sector. There's a lot of these things called business cases. There's parallels in the private sector. So the return on investment for this AI productivity project is highly favorable, yielding 10 million year-on-year savings by quarter four 2027. Again, this agonized wording is basically saying at some extremely future point in time, a specific amount of money will exist that will be a saving for us. It's not true. It can never be true. There's no amount of research or evidence or simulation or analysis that could produce this kind of result. Yet we've just normalized it in how we write it into our kind of corporate information. So what's going on here is these examples of false certainty they're building on something called the happy path. They are imagining slightly perfected situations where this technology is applied, nothing goes wrong, all the skills are there, the data's there, people succeed, they get the hypothesized gain from the beginning, and you rinse and repeat that several times to get to a number like 40 billion that you do in that kind of original quote that I gave you. But the problem is that there's an unhappy path, even for the simplest work with AI, which is completely normal. Anyone in the room that has tried to kind of do something with AI inside an institution, you probably would have found that quite complicated, and things probably went wrong along the way, even if you eventually succeeded. So I think that unexpected can be confidently expected. And this is it. This is the perfect organization that a lot of this false certainty relies upon. It relies upon all these layers working well together, the happy path, the delivery, the success story. So just to kind of unpack a little bit, this is some examples of what I might be talking about when I say the happy path and the unhappy path in organizations. I won't go through all these, but picking out a couple of examples. Resistance to change on the unhappy path. It's really common that if you introduce a disruptive technology that genuinely has an impact, that people are going to resist that change in all different kinds of ways. Sometimes legitimately, sometimes perhaps they shouldn't be resisting, but they are. Insufficient leadership, like to be able to kind of work through a complex change requires really strong leadership, really consistent communication, powerful use of language. Not all organizations have those kind of leadership skills in the right place at the right time to achieve that type of change. That gives you a couple of examples. The thing about that right-hand column is it's completely normal. Most organizations will probably experience a bit of all of the unhappy path whenever they try to deliver with a technology like AI. So it's completely normal, should be expected, and therefore really undermines a lot of that false certainty that's out there. So I think we have to be optimistic about AI, but we need to do so in a way that doesn't sidestep or ignore the complexities of what it takes to deliver in the real world. And in that sense, like AI is a silver spanner, not a silver bullet. You can go in there and you can use it as a tool, but it's not always going to give you the answer that you want. So now I'm going to use a little bit of a kind of toy example. It's the Department of Bikes in an unspecified country. This is a government department, imaginary government department. There's a bit of a disclaimer here. Any resemblance to real organizations or other real-life entities is purely coincidental. With this one, I chickened out. It's too hard to go after like really specific examples and unpick some of the real problems with them because organizations don't like to tell these stories. Consultancies don't like to tell these stories. I've chickened out. I work for a consultancy because it can feel like you're being rude. But the fact is that this effect with this toy example I'm going to describe, I've seen it happen in organizations. So in a Department of Bikes, they have a system where you can get questions answered by email and a human will respond in about 2 weeks. And afterwards, you can type a question into a chatbot and you can get a response in 3 seconds. Brilliant. That sounds really good. This is it. This isn't the prototype. This is the live system. So you go to the Departments of Bikes chatbot. You type in, do I need a license to ride my e-bike, and where can I get one? Helpfully, you press the submit button. 3 seconds later, yes, get your license at gov.country/e-bike license. You're straight in there. That previously would have taken 2 weeks for a confused individual who didn't know how to get their e-bike license. Obviously, behind the scenes, what we've got going on there, very, very brief jargon alert. This is the large language model behind the scenes. It's collected up all of the content that describes the services of the government department. It's added that onto a foundation model. And what it's capable of doing is understanding the language that you've written and giving you a pre-canned answer at the bottom of the service that you can use. They're pre-canned answers, so you never get an answer that's inaccurate. You might get an answer that is the wrong answer to your question. But quite often it works. So the happy path is better, faster, cheaper. It's the silver bullet. It's the ultimate kind of win-win situation for a leader, for a government department with affordability challenges. I don't find the happy path particularly interesting. Personally, I found the unhappy path incredibly fascinating. So you've got all these weird and wonderful effects when you kind of put this kind of automation into a real-world situation. So with the Department of Bikes, people were starting to get a faster no. What the faster no means is, rather than waiting 2 weeks to understand that this imaginary government doesn't offer a service to them, or absolutely says you are not eligible for this service, or offers a service in a way that they don't want to access that service, they're getting that no much, much faster. And that instantaneous no is causing some behavior change. People are kind of going, oh, okay, I know immediately I can't get the thing. I'm going to maybe write an email directly to the department anyway, asking in a more complicated fashion what I can get. And another interesting thing, latent demand. I worked in justice. There was a huge amount of latent demand for justice. There's latent demand for the Department of Bikes. You made the services better and faster and cheaper to access. Somewhere else in the department, they've got to provide those services. They've got new demand, new cost, that's far greater than the cost saving that was achieved with the chatbot. So you've got a really complicated kind of service design problem there, where you've almost kind of invited more people into services that are expensive to provide. The AI itself has got new costs, times, and risks associated with it, so the AI system itself has become a slightly more complicated system to run. And then this kind of time-saving problem where the people that previously were answering the emails, they haven't just kind of been made redundant with an instant cost saving. Their roles have just simply changed and adapted. They're doing kind of higher value activities. Now, you might make the argument that you should be forcing that to ultimately become a cost saving, but it's, you're dealing with human beings, and it's actually very common when you you make life more efficient for people in organizations. They simply do other work. So what's the impact of being falsely certain about AI? So what's the impact of all of that kind of, that language I was talking about that's in the media and it's inside organizations? So firstly, I think it's making people unnecessarily anxious about being left behind or missing the big opportunity. These are perhaps two phrases I've heard quite a lot at this conference as well. I think the technology is exciting, but it shouldn't be causing this level of anxiety for people. And the anxiety comes from the mismatch that they see. This is based on someone I did genuinely speak to. Again, I've chickened out and anonymized them. So I've been told to leverage AI to look for opportunities to drive up productivity. There don't seem to be any that will give the savings that we need to make. This was a CIO under pressure from a CFO to make savings in their organizations driven by AI. That's the narrative they'd heard in the media. They were layering that expectation onto the CIO, and the CIO could not see an obvious place where they were a reasonably expert CIO. They couldn't get the thinking to see where that kind of savings opportunity was. Now, maybe that's short-sightedness on the CIO's part, but maybe that saving really wasn't there to be made. It's draining funding and space for innovation. if you set these if you set this kind of false certainty up, and particularly if you label it as innovation, so you do a so-called innovative business case that is saying, I'm going to do fabulous things for your organization, it's actually draining money away from the real innovation, which is not making these promises. A lot of the most exciting innovation I've seen has kind of just happened where you've had empowered teams with the right tools and the right skills, and not because someone's made a bold promise about what they're going to do, but because they've used their own energy and creativity to innovate, and the space has been given to them. At worst, it can end up like this. This bleeped out blog post title, I will pile drive you if you mention AI again, is written by a data scientist deeply frustrated with the culture around them that is starting to kind of massively overpromise what is possible with the technology that they've been a kind of lifetime expert in. And it's a fascinating read. It's maybe the language isn't everyone's cup of tea, but it's fascinating to see that kind of reaction of expertise to false certainty. So, how to be better at using AI? This one I'm going to have to go through briefly, and it's probably the least accessible part of my talk as well. So, be less certain about AI. I think it makes it better. And do the hard work to make it more likely that you'll succeed. And I go back to this organization. So basically, you need to be really good at all the things that organizations have always had to be really good at to succeed. You've got to have a healthy culture. You've got to have a dynamic, responsive operating model. You've got to be good at all things we've previously labeled as digital, your data, your user-centered design, your software development. These practices are foundational to the idea of being good at AI at scale. The problem is that most organizations really have quite a fractured base. They are working on models and ideas from the 1960s about how you run organizations, the way we do our finances, the way we build our hierarchies and our governance and our internal corporate communication has not really changed in most institutions since the 1960s. And that makes it very hard to do the stuff at the top. It fractures the stuff at the top. A lot of the AI success stories that you see and hear about, I would argue, are happening in spite of the institutional infrastructure around them, often in opposition to the institutional infrastructure around them. Wouldn't it be better if we could enable it from the base? These are some of the things that I think, in more detail, you need to be really good at to kind of build this stack up. Openness, humility, and collaboration in your culture. More services and fewer projects and empowered teams in your dynamic operating model. Service design, data quality, and systems thinking in your digital space. Each of these labels is perhaps a talk in itself. So what I'm really just showing you here is like you layer up these practices and you can be good at AI. Crucially, these things, sometimes you might hear these things referred to as best practice. I actually think they're radical. They're radical because if you start to do all of them, you look like a very distinct organization. You look like an organization that is resisting those kind of norms that have been established before the internet. We've written about that. This is one example. We've got a thing called the Radical How. It's a paper we've written that was actually mostly targeted at Labour government. We think it's got relevance outside of that, but it's about all those ideas about how you need to change your organizations to be better at not just AI, but broader range of innovation and technology delivery. So the future of AI is exciting because we have no idea what it's going to be. Thank you very much.